A federal judge dismissed the charges against two LMPD officers accused in the Breonna Taylor case. Joshua Janes and Kyle Meany were accused of lying on the search warrant used by officers to burst into Taylor's apartment. They were not on scene the night police killed Taylor in March of 2020. Janes and Meany were indicted by the U.S. government in 2023 by prosecutors working under the Biden administration. The case has been tied up in the federal court system and then stretched into President Donald Trump's term. Last week, his DOJ moved to drop the charges against the officers, saying the case should be dismissed in the interest of justice. Today, Judge Charles Simpson agreed and dropped the case with prejudice, meaning the officers cannot be charged again.
With the battering ram in their hand, it was so traumatic to hear the way the thing was hitting the door. And it happened so fast, I didn't have time to put on clothes.
You got the wrong house!
And she was right. They were in the wrong house. We found they simply took the word of an informant who gave them Anjanette Young's address.
There's absolutely no reason to make entry into a house unannounced unless you're rescuing hostages. Let me repeat that again. Unless you're rescuing hostages, there's no reason to make entry.
On March 13th, 2020, after midnight, officers from the Louisville Metro Police Department move in on an apartment tied to a narcotics investigation. A federal judge has dismissed the most serious charges tied to Breonna Taylor's death. And that means that after everything, no officer is currently facing any federal prison time for the shooting itself. When I see the judge say particularly fatal shots are legally justified because of what happened seconds earlier.
This is the Hill of Justice.
I'm Jerome Hill, former police officer and state investigator, and with me is retired Sheriff Victor Hill. Before we get into this, if you care about how policing is actually supposed to work and how it's portrayed, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, because what we're about to break down, most people won't even catch. So, brother, we have the Breonna Taylor case that just popped up about 3 days ago. The federal judge dismissed the case because the federal government decided to go ahead and not prosecute its own case with prejudice. We'll get into that portion of it. But to bring people back up to speed on what happened to Breonna Taylor's situation, on March 13th, 2020, after midnight, officers from the Louisville Metro Police Department move in on an apartment tied to a narcotics investigation. They were looking for a particular target, but this was actually a bunch of targets that they were doing all on the west side of the city. So when that generally happens, there's probably some connection from one house to one area of the city to another, and they want to go ahead and hit it all at the same time so they won't jeopardize any parts of their case. And we could break that down a little bit later too. So as that turns out, they had this particular target inside, or they were hoping that he was inside. What they were able to get was a no-knock warrant, but the person wasn't inside, and the warrant still gets executed. And the things that we're going to talk about today is the sequence and why it matters in an investigation and why we're to this point right now. So the police approached the door. They say they knocked and announced, and they went inside the apartment. So I want to stop right there because I think that there's something that you and I could talk about when it comes to the no-knock warrants, particularly in narcotics investigations, as opposed to homicide investigations. So what I just spelled to you a little bit after midnight, and certainly they had a no-knock warrant. What are some things that come up to you about some of the things I've said already?
All right. Well, two things. One of them we probably don't disagree on, but that's not uncommon, is it? But the first thing is this. I outlawed in my policy no-knock search warrants. I think the real issue here is a no-knock search warrant. We'll get to the case later. I think we got to be real careful about charging officers and throwing willful intent out the window, because right now, prosecutors go on emotions, their emotions, or what they think the crowd emotion is going to be. But when you start charging officers, you got to look at this. What was their intent? Was their intent to go in there and kill somebody? And if that wasn't the intent, then they have this attitude, throw them in jail because we're mad or because there's some type of political movement that's anti-police, is just wrong. So unfortunately, things happen. And of course, you see civil all over it if it's wrong procedure. But when you start charging people with aggravated assault and murder, and it wasn't their intent to assault anybody or to murder anybody, that's a slippery slope. And that's why you see things happen like what's happening now when cases ultimately get dismissed. People acted on emotions instead of logic. But let's go to the no-knock search warrant. If we want to solve this problem that people perceive of police when situations like this, it's not charging officers for when they had no intent to injure somebody and they thought that they were acting in good faith. The secret is to change the policy. Here's why I outlawed no-knock search warrants. There's absolutely no reason to make entry into a house unannounced unless you're rescuing hostages. Let me repeat that again. Unless you're rescuing hostages, there's no reason to make entry. Now, there's always these arguments out here that like I remember talking to the police chief when I stopped it and I advised him to do it. And he said something, and of course, people repeat what they've heard over the years because we've heard this ever since we were young cops. But the reason you do a no-knock search warrant is because you want to stop them from destroying evidence. Okay, how much evidence can you destroy with drugs from the time it takes to call someone out or gas them out or whatever? It's not that easy to flush stuff down the toilet, especially marijuana. It floats. But if that's your concern, then all you got to do is cut the plumbing off and cut off the water. So now the toilet can't flush. Then there's this other argument. Well, if we don't get in there fast, they can get to their guns. Okay. What SWAT team do you know is fast enough to get in a house and get the suspect before someone can just reach their nightstand or grab a gun that's already on them? No one's that fast. Statistics show that when you make entry into a house, if the other person on the other side is going to shoot, he doesn't have to be skilled because he's shooting in this fatal funnel. It doesn't take a whole lot. There's an 80% chance that the first officer through the door is going to get hit. So why are we risking a life to save drugs? Or why are we risking a life because we think someone might get to a gun? If you think they might get to a gun, stay behind the shield, stay behind the armored stuff, call them out. There's robots that can go in, dogs that can go in, and ultimately we can use gas to force them out. We can cut the power, we can cut the water, we can cut the gas and everything. They're going to come out. So it makes absolutely no sense to risk a life for drugs or evidence or whatever like that. You only risk a life to save a life. And if you think like that, then you realize there's no real reason to make entry. There's different ways to bring people out.
I agree with you. I know you thought that I was going to go ahead and probably push back on you. These are the type of search warrants that I've done routinely, and they were the most nerve-wracking search warrants that I could have ever done. Every single one of us was at the mercy of everyone in that house. And
Absolutely.
It just made no damn sense in doing those type of search warrants. And the truth of the matter was, we have the technology today to go ahead and breach a house if we absolutely have to. If I have to go into a house, it has to be exigent circumstances. We're talking about a hostage situation. We're
Absolutely.
talking about a felony in progress, and we're talking about violence in that type of sense.
Absolutely.
So
If we don't get in and do something, people are going to get hurt or they're going to die. That's
Correct.
when you breach a door, and it has to be done quickly. But here's the caveat to that that's so sad. I dare to say 90% or more of the police departments are not hostage rescue ready.
Mhm.
There are very few cops that are trained, even SWAT teams. So these SWAT teams, they're good at barricaded suspects and throwing gas and stuff like that. But how many of them are trained to do a breach, force entry in the house, and accurate enough and confident enough They hit the hostage takers and not hit the hostages. That's a
Yeah,
whole different level of training.
skill set.
I
Right.
actually had to, when I was sheriff, I had to bring in some specialists. I had to contact ex-military people, ex-Delta, ex-Navy SEALs, people who specialize in hostage rescue. Very few SWAT teams are hostage rescue ready. They got all the toys, they got everything, but they're basically good for surrounding the house, barricading it, gas. But if you're talking about, okay, we're going to do a forced entry and a hostage rescue, and the sad part about it, what my goal was to get the whole sheriff's office to the point where they're a hostage rescue. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Your regular court deputies, they're walking around the courtroom. Everybody gets relaxed. It's just a courtroom. Nothing's going to happen. Well, Brian Nichols proved that wrong. The problem with the courthouse is it doesn't happen often enough for people to stay alert. But think about this. If a person grabs a hostage in a courthouse, you got a deputy that's going to be there with his pistol. They're probably going to be 3 to 10 feet away. How many deputies do you trust, or police officers do you trust, can make that shot with their pistol? Because you got someone holding a hostage and they can make that shot and you feel confident they're going to hit the hostage taker, not that. Most of them are too terrified. And then with what we're getting ready to talk about, with all this prosecution of cops for things they didn't intend to do, they're even more terrified now. That's why that famous situation that happened at the school in Texas, were the officers afraid to go in and shoot it out with this guy, or were they afraid to go in and accidentally hit a child and end up on charges? And the sad part is, even though that wouldn't have been their intent, administrators are at fault because you're not training these officers, that giving them the type of training that they need. Most departments, you qualify once a year. So you pull out your gun and shoot once a year and shoot at a non-moving target that's not shooting back. And then we expect them to go out and be a gunfighters and win a gunfight.
Right.
And then when something happens, like what happened with Breonna Taylor, we're like, okay, wait a second, we want to lock you up and put you in jail.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a whole tangled weed because of the lack of vision of leadership, the lack of strength of leadership to really put something together that can truly, truly protect the public.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, but getting back to the case in terms of the after midnight portion of it, I don't know too many of the police departments that are doing a no-knock search warrant at that time after midnight. And the reason being is because it's still at an hour where a lot of people are up and aware. The sweet spot has always been 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. to hit these houses, especially for a no-knock warrant. And I don't understand, and we do need to talk about the difference between a no-knock warrant and a knock and announce warrant. And this is all predicated on the Supreme Court and also the Constitution, more importantly, the Fourth Amendment. So when we talk about knock and announce warrants, we're talking about you knock and you say police search warrant, and you wait a reasonable amount of time, and that'll be determined by what you have and whether the circumstances. And then you enter if there's no type of response. The no-knock warrant is a little bit different in this sense that you go ahead, you immediately knock, and at that point in time, you're saying almost simultaneously or even immediately thereafter once you breach it and saying, hey, guess what? This is police. We have a warrant. Sometimes that gets perverse. I've been in no-knock warrants where I've had officers say, please, and then slam the door to go inside. I don't know what that was all about. That wasn't my case. I was just a supporting police officer or detective at the time. I never agreed with that type of stuff. And when I told you about the scary part of those type of jobs in narcotics, that was one of them, where we just knew that all hell was going to break loose as soon as we went inside. And sure enough, it did. And so those are the problems we have.
Right. Well, it's this assumption that when you're going to hit the house with such force and moving so fast, it's going to take everybody off guard. But here's the problem with that. You can't predict how people are going to react. And you can't, and then there's a legit point on the other side. There's been so many criminals that have dressed up like cops, that have gone in under the guise of being the police, the sheriff's office, or whatever, to rob. So they don't really know, okay, is this legitimately the police or is this a robbing crew?
Correct.
But
that's true.
Exactly, but someone's making forcible entry to your house. You grab your gun, you start shooting, and
Mhm.
then the first thing is, okay, well, you shot at police officers. Well, I thought the house was being broken into. It's a tactical nightmare. Now, one thing we need to visit is you were talking about 12 o'clock at night as opposed to 4 to 6 in the morning. I don't know if I agree whether 12 or 4 or 6 is better because it's based on the intelligence that the officers have. Maybe they had reason to believe a person was going to be at this time. But let me tell you the issue that most people miss. And I hope that there are chiefs and sheriffs listening to this so they can ask this question. You'll be surprised how many SWAT teams do not have night vision capability. So you're
That's
going to
the
do a
reason
raid
why
at
the
night.
4 to 6 is so important. And I want to go ahead and bring that up because not a lot of them do. And so
Right.
we have the predicate knowing that sunlight is coming soon. So that's the
Right, but
reason why.
soon ain't good when you're in a shootout in the dark. It's
Well, I
coming
agree
soon,
with
but if
you,
you're kicking and
but
you're
it's better
kicking in the
than
door, you need to see it, right? You need
right.
to be able to see at that time, those 3-5 seconds
I
that you're
agree.
under fire,
You're
right?
not wrong. But
Right.
if you don't have that because you're cash strapped city or cash strapped county or whatever may be the issue, you got to have something. You won't want to do a shootout for 4 hours straight, knowing that I'd rather do it two to have some idea of light coming in. So that's the reason why. That's the reason behind that.
Right. So the sad part, you get these situations, and when I took over the sheriff's office, they had spotlights that
Mhm.
they would put up to light up a residence, and that's fine. But you could be taking ongoing fire while you're setting that up. But no matter
Mhm.
how many spotlights you have on that house, once
Mhm.
you get in that house, if the lights on
All
are
lights are
on,
off.
and then here's another issue people don't understand: even during the daytime, if you go in a house and it has no power or you cut off the power, whatever happens, there are dark spaces in that house depending on whether there's windows there or whatever. So
Correct.
night vision capabilities is a must no matter what. But you'll be surprised how many SWAT teams don't have night vision capabilities and they don't
Right.
realize they don't have it until they're rushing through a door at night.
Right.
And you know how they teach patrol officers to hold a flashlight and a gun. Of course, now it's different. They have the guns now with the flashlights attached to it.
Sure.
And that's another story too.
Right.
But that's another reason why it's interesting that happened at night. Now, again, we got to revisit this. What has gone completely out of the door with these prosecutors? And a lot of it is them being emotional. A lot of them are afraid of the emotions of the crowd, the media, whatever, is willful intent. And until we can get laws in place that forces prosecutors that have to show willful intent before they indict or before they take the court, or even if they take the court, they need to prove willful intent. That's gone completely out the window.
And we're going to
Judges
get
are
there.
ignoring it. Exactly.
We're going to get to
Right.
that because I want to break
Exactly.
this down little by little so we can.
Okay.
It's a big elephant, and we got to go ahead and chew this little by a time.
All right, let's
So,
take the bite.
to your point, Kenneth Walker is in the house with Breonna Taylor. He hears the breach. He's coming through the hallway. He has his weapon, and justifiably, or so he says, he hears something very different from what the police are saying. The
Mhm.
police said, "Hey, guess what? We're police." He believes that it's a home invasion, and he fires one shot, and he shoots one of the officers in the leg. And if you look at on his side of it, guess what? I don't have a problem with that. He doesn't
Did,
know that they're police.
did they charge him with? I know they charged him with the other stuff, but did they charge
They
him with shooting a
tried
police
to,
officer?
but yeah, they tried to, but conversely, the officer gets shot, and the two other officers that are with him, they start volleying shots into the home. Okay,
Which is logical too.
which is logical also. One shot, but we know that in those type of situations, you're hearing your buddy shooting, you're mistaking it for somebody else shooting inside, you're all volleying shots inside. Okay,
Absolutely.
Breonna gets killed. Okay.
Yes.
And I believe the bullet goes through the apartment and nearly strikes someone else. So we got those issues there. So obviously these officers return fire. and it's a multiple mess. So
Yes.
that's the first part that we need to go ahead and explain to folks, that in the context of what we're talking about, the justifiableness of what Kenneth felt and what the officers felt at the time. I have no problem with either one at this point in time. And we're just being objective about it, right?
Right.
Okay. Now let's break down this. Okay. So this is where really we start talking about if the officers announced properly, the entry is lawful, then really we don't have anything to really worry about, because that's within the legal framework of what is supposed to happen. It's simple, it's clean. This is where you would think that the investigation stops. But of course, we had someone who passed away. So the target now is not present, and they have to ask, where's the target? Well, I mean, we thought that the target was in there, and then it comes down to, we start to find out not only was there sloppy police work, but they falsified the search warrant.
No
Now
problem
we
with
got
that.
problems.
They should be charged with that. They should be charged with falsifying that. I have no problems with that at all.
Ooh,
Okay.
and,
Now,
and so it does get like that, okay?
right.
We got to break down about 5 officers that are involved in this, because not every one of their stories are different. And it's going to lead to a little bit to what you're arguing about, or what you're
Let me
trying to
ask you this. The officers that fired the shots, were they the ones that falsified the search warrant?
No.
All right, they shouldn't be charged. They acted in good faith based on what they got. So why are we trying to put them in jail? But whoever falsified that search warrant needs to go for falsifying documents to the court.
Okay. So that's where we're going to get into. Now we move forward with this federal case. And the federal case is brought upon that there were civil rights violations. Okay. The civil rights violations was in the manner of how many shots that were shot, that one officer shot. He saw like 10. And obviously he shot through a window without even seeing what's inside. Do you got a problem with that?
With training, yes, you should always know what you're shooting before you shoot. Now, there is it's easier said than done, because let's say there's some bullets coming out of a door at you or something like that, and you can't see and you're trying to stop it. That's where it gets hanky. But again, you're dealing with a training issue, and you're dealing with a civil issue. Again, I believe that they definitely have some negligence there, and it definitely should be a lawsuit that probably shouldn't even be fought to settle, which I think it was. But still, willful intent. Was he trying to kill Breonna Taylor? His actions, unfortunately, you got this chain of event, like that famous shooting that happened in New York, and they did a study on this. One officer fires, and then every officer is like trying to narrow in on what he's doing and fire as well too. But you got to look at the intent. Was his intent to kill an innocent person, or was his intent to stop a threat because he thought he was under fire? If he doesn't have the willful intent to murder someone, we've got to put a stop to this craziness.
Okay.
Willful intent should be on everything.
Right.
And that's why the job is becoming even more dangerous. And you see all these cops getting locked up, and they're not looking at willful intent. I think I'll tell you a story we got going on in Atlanta. I don't know what happened to it, but there was an officer. You see the video. The guy's DUI. He gets out. He's non-compliant. One of the officers reaches for him. He snatches away, swings at the officer. So another officer tackles him and handcuffs him. As they lift him up, he starts wobbling. It turns out when they fell to the ground, he sprained or snapped his ankle. Okay. Was that the intent of the officer, to sprain his ankle? Or was that him trying to stop the situation, which I agree with, because anytime someone does that, they're not going peacefully. So he was trying to go ahead and get the guy into custody. Okay. So had he stood on this guy's leg and pulled it and said, I'm going to snap your leg, or hey, is it snapped yet, or whatever, that's a willful intent. and the process of tackling him, it happened. Well, the DA of Fulton County, who that's a whole nother show in itself, indicts this officer for aggravated assault. Again, willful intent is completely out the door now. And then when you got judges that go along with this, they don't even look at it. They don't even look at it. I mean, ask me how I know. So if this officer didn't have the intent to kill somebody, okay, did he make a mistake? Yes. Can he done better tactics? Yeah. And that's easy to tell someone when they're under fire that, hey, you shouldn't do this and shouldn't do that. Is it civil? Yes. Is it criminal? No.
And so this is how it was seen by DOJ. The officer that was shot, Jonathan Mattingly, okay, he was not fired. He later retired from the police department. But he was able to go ahead and even after getting shot, he was able to shoot back into the structure. But he was pretty much deemed okay on that end of it. Miles Cosgrove, okay, he was identified as the officer who most likely killed Breonna Taylor.
Why most likely? They don't have the ballistics to prove it?
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine that they have the ballistics to prove it. To prove it. But as it stands, with the court document that he is most likely the person who killed him. And he was fired by the department, not criminally charged for the shooting, but he was fired for putting in 16 rounds. Okay, and one of them shooting Taylor, but was reckless with 16 rounds.
How many times do officers fire back when they're being shot at? What's the exact number? Has the courts figured out if you shot at, you shoot back twice, you shoot back 3 times? Do you keep shooting until you're sure? Has anyone prescribed that?
I mean, our training is not to go ahead and shoot into a lockback, pop out, and then you make sure that the scene
so
safe.
The training says 2 shots, pop out, and that's it. It says that you get shot at, shoot twice, and then stop.
Well, it's not as clear and simple as that.
Exactly.
Okay? Right.
Exactly.
I just want to be clear on that.
Right. Right.
And we're talking about more pristine conditions when I say, 2 shots before we go on. You're not to arbitrarily believe that always shoot back into a lockback and then check to make sure the scene's safe.
Well, you should be reloading at the minute that lockback. You should be reloading. Exactly.
Right. So then, okay, so we have that officer. Then we have, a sergeant got charged. And I know you are not going to like this. Mm-hmm. So the sergeant gets charged, and he is allegedly part of the falsification of the affidavit because he signed off on it. Okay. And he was supposed to make sure that all the, I's were dotted, the T's were crossed.
What I's did he not see was dotted? Because when people present lies to you, and if you don't have any way right at that moment to know it's a lie, and you have no reason to disbelieve them, again, what's the willful intent there?
No, I agree with you because judges do it all the time, right?
Yeah, they sign warrants all the time.
I go to judges all the time. Hey, this is what I see. This was what I was able to do. Can I get a warrant?
Right, and there's some bad cops that have lied to the judges to get warrants. So do we lock up the judges? Because based on the information they're being given, they sign the warrant. See, that's the type of craziness I'm talking about that's going on.
This is where he gets jammed up. Mm-hmm. Okay. He gets a felony charge for allegedly lying to the FBI.
Okay.
A misdemeanor charge for the warrant, and he's convicted. And he could be sentenced to 5 years in prison. I'm going to tell you about.
I got to know what the lie was. I mean, if he lied to them intentionally, oh well, he should have done that.
He covered up for 2 other officers. I'm about to get to them.
Okay.
Kelly Goodlett. Okay, she pleaded guilty to conspiracy in 2022 for her role in this. She goes up to Jonathan. Okay, there's a guy by the name of Jonathan. What is his name? James or something like that. And they go about saying, hey, guess what? They go into his garage and saying, hey, guess what? The things that we wrote in the search warrant, you got to get on the same page with me, or we're going to find ourselves in trouble. Well, guess what she does? She gets into trouble, and now she's the government witness with this.
Yeah.
Okay. Now she pled guilty already
Okay.
to this, and for her role in falsifying the warrant. Now she won't be sentenced until everyone else is sentenced in this matter. And now I'm talking about the sergeant who knew about this and lied to FBI saying that he didn't know, so on and so forth. James that was in there, Jonathan James, and herself. Okay. So those are the officer roles. So you got 3 officers, okay, involved in that, embroiled in that portion of it. Right?
Right.
Okay. And then you got 2 officers, more to what you're talking about, that one officer was exonerated because he's the one that got shot and he's trying to defend himself legally. But then you have the other one that volleys into a window all those shots. You know,
Yeah, it might not be stupid, but was his intention to kill Breonna Taylor? We got to ask that question.
and the answer is no.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. What did they falsify on that warrant?
What I
Do we
understand,
know?
yes, what I understand they falsified in the report was, get this, they went to the U.S. Postal Service to go ahead and ask, hey, guess what? Does this person live at this address? And they said the U.S. Postmaster said that they did. The U.S. Postmaster said nobody came to us to ask about if they did that. I was only approached after the fact, not before the fact. And what they did ask me of an individual, we told them no, that person doesn't exist there. And they wrote it for that person at that search warrant. That was the chief issue.
Right. Yeah.
Now you're jammed up.
Cutting corners,
Yeah.
right? Well, let me tell you this. This is a good note to end on, because I tell you this. I was under a lot of fire for firing people for lying. I was a stickler for it. If you lied in an investigation, if you lied in court, I didn't care what you lied about, you had to go. There were a lot of people, what they did wasn't that major, and they wouldn't have got fired. Maybe they would have got suspended, they would have got demoted. But if they lied, I fired them. And this is the reason why. I will always believe that the truth prevails in the end, even if the end takes a long time. But never underestimate the power of a lie. There are a lot of people wrongfully convicted because of a lie. Ask me how I know. There are a lot of people who were executed because of a lie. Anytime you see false prosecutions, it can only be 2 reasons. It's perjury or manufacturing evidence, which is still a lie, because technically that's what this is, manufacturing evidence that doesn't exist, which either or how you want to look as a lie. You can lie by omission or commission. So I found that if you're going to lie about investigations at the agency, then that tells me you're type of person that may lie to get a search warrant, that may lie to get a warrant, that may give false testimony to get someone convicted to prove a case that you really don't have. And that's why I ruthlessly fired people when I caught them lying. Okay, I once had a commander, he said, everybody lies. Okay, that may be true. Lie to your wife so you don't get caught. Lie to a girlfriend so you can impress her. But don't lie when it comes to law enforcement and stuff you're under oath.
Right. And I think that the micro portion of this is, did the officers, particularly 3 of them, create the conditions that led to the shooting?
Mm-hmm.
And should they be responsible because of what happened? And I like your thoughts on that. They lied.
Yeah, I agree that they should be held responsible. Of course, I will always be a stickler for willful intent, because I've seen what it can do to people. I've seen what it had done to me in an instance. They should definitely be charged with perjury, false statements, or whatever. They should definitely be held liable for her death. Now, was it their intent to kill someone? No. And I'm always going to be a stickler for willful intent. Willful intent, the lack of requiring that by judges and prosecutors, is why the jails are overcrowded and why a lot of innocent people are in jail.
Mhm.
Punish the people for what they get. DAs, what they will do is you'll charge somebody with something, and then they'll start charging with everything under the sun. And the logic is, well, if we charge him with murder, maybe he'll plead to involuntary manslaughter. If what he did was involuntary manslaughter, that's what he needs to be charged with. By you charging with something that doesn't fit the elements of the crime, you're lying. You're lying to a grand jury, telling them that, hey, we need to indict this guy on murder. If that's not the element, then it's a lie. It's manslaughter. And you should never overcharge somebody so you can drop the charge of what it is appropriately. That's wrong. And that's
Mhm.
why we got so many rogue prosecutors. In Georgia, unfortunately, we got two of the worst.
Yeah, and that I don't disagree with. I think that where we have where there's tension at
Yeah.
becomes where we have three officers, whether they're trying to impress their colleagues or want to get into this big narcotics raid on this particular day, and they embellish, so they put a person's name that they are targeting to a house that he wasn't even assigned to,
Right.
and
Right.
thus created all this chaos. And it cost the city $12 million.
That's correct. But again, let's take like kids driving fast when they shouldn't and they kill somebody. The proper charge is vehicle homicide,
Hmm.
not malice murder. When
Right.
they were driving like fools, I don't think they were like, hey, let's drive like fools so we can kill someone and go to jail the rest of our life. But their stupid actions, their negligence caused the death of someone. So that's the appropriate charge.
The
I think
civil portion of that, as
right.
opposed to the criminal portion.
Exactly. And then if you want to go criminal, like I say, vehicle homicide, there's certain situations where it's involuntary manslaughter. I've worked cases like that. Two kids playing with a gun. One thought the gun was unloaded.
Mhm.
So they're playing Russian roulette and boom, the gun goes off. That wasn't his intent to kill him.
Right.
So it make absolutely no sense to charge him with murder. So I went and got warrants for involuntary manslaughter. It was his negligence that killed his friend. Now, of course, our dummy DA probably upgraded it to murder or something like that, but that's wrong. That's not what happened there. You know what I'm saying?
Right. We have the family who's distraught by what happened to their loved one, and I feel for them. And I
Of
think
course.
a lot of what's going on is, we're breaking this down, what it means legally to go
Right.
ahead and charge someone. And we're stripping emotions out of it.
Exactly. Of
We
course, when
agree.
somebody hurts your family member,
Yeah.
the emotions is you want to see them hanged, whatever like that. But the leaders have to look at the law, which they no longer do in a lot of instances. And sometimes it's not with a lot of these judges and prosecutors. It's not about what the law says. It's about the emotions, or it's about the media, or it's about the crowd that's asking for somebody's head. And that's where you have to be a leader and say, okay, this is what the crime is. Does something need to happen here? Yes. But we got to look at willful intent. Was it their intent to murder her? And if it
Mhm.
wasn't their intent to murder her, murder is not the appropriate charge. But if you're
Right.
falsifying stuff or whatever like that, there are some appropriate charges for that. And
Right.
of course, there's a civil angle where they all can be civilly liable as well.
Right. So Brett Hankinson is the one who shot about 10 times indiscriminately into the window. Now, with that being said, he gets fired. Are you all right with that?
Yeah, I mean, I could
I know
see
you
that.
say it's a training issue.
I could see that. I got to know what his training was, what they trained him to. If they didn't train him appropriately, then it's hypocritical to fire him. But if there was distinct training or whatever like that, I would have to know all of the facts. But if it was clear cut training that he was told not to do that and he violated policy, sure. Of course,
Okay.
they're gonna right.
Okay,
Sure, of
but here's
course.
my
Yeah.
throwback on that. You're
No.
saying that it has to be a training issue. Whatever happened to common sense?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you this. When you send police officers out there, you're assuming that they have common sense, and you can't assume that. You got to pretty much hold their hand. Running an agency is a lot like running a kindergarten, and all of them have guns, and all of them don't necessarily think logically. So you've got to have training there, and you got to have it documented that this person was trained not to do this or not to do that.
Okay,
And
so
right.
here goes the pushback on that. So we get to our standard is, what would a reasonable person do? Would a reasonable person, even if they didn't have training, would they just shoot 10 times into a
We
covered
see
window?
reasonable people do it all the time. They hear stuff at the door and they start shooting through the door. They're normally reasonable, but they get scared. And they think there's something on the side of the door. And unfortunately, sometimes it's their wife, is a family member. And we got to look at intent. Like the guy that shot his pregnant wife through the door, which was one of the most tragic cases I ever read about. He thought that she was breaking in the house. She was supposed to be somewhere, and I think she got off work early or whatever, so he thought he was breaking in the house. Was it his intent to murder his wife that night? No. And I'm
No.
sure he's probably mentally distraught to this day, even though that was a couple of decades ago I read about that case. So again, you got to look at willful intent. I don't think this guy was necessarily unreasonable. He got scared, and then you got to look at the totality of the circumstances. Let's say there were burglaries in the area and someone already happened, and he thought, oh, wow, they're here. So he shoots through the door, and then unfortunately, tragically finds out it's his wife. So,
Well, I would expect that for somebody who's not trained.
right. And that's why I said, what was he trained on? You'd be surprised these agencies, the lack of training or the lack of clarity in their policy. And some of it is vague. And then people try to decipher it after something has happened, and they want to decipher it to fit their narrative. So those are the facts I don't have. But overall, if he was trained to not do that and they fired him, I'm all for it.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take that to a profession like an airline pilot.
Okay.
If he wasn't trained on a particular system and he flies and kills everybody.
Well, first of all, he's going to be dead anyway. If he flies and kills everybody, he's dead too.
I mean, I agree with you, but he's just as culpable. He should know better.
He should know better, and it's definitely civil. But was his intent to kill himself and everybody that day? Did he get on a plane and say, you know what, I'm going to kill everybody and kill myself? No. Unfortunately, sometimes people make mistakes, and that's why you got to know the difference between civil and criminal.
No, right.
The scenario you're talking about, I don't think he said, you know what, I'm going to kill myself and everybody today.
No, but that's the point. He wasn't trying to do that. But what he should have did was alert somebody. Hey, I don't have that training.
Well, again, I don't know if that's a good example because he's dead, so he couldn't alert him. I'm sure he would have alerted them if he thought he was going to kill himself too.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that as a professional, I mean, I'm not going in with Navy SEAL Team 6 into Afghanistan.
Right. But you worked for a dysfunctional agency just like I have worked for 2 dysfunctional agencies. Mm-hmm. And you can ask for training, they don't give it to you. We're talking a whole bunch of totality of circumstances that everyone needs to look at. What a lot of these prosecutors do is they'll take everything and put it in a vacuum, and they don't want to tell you what happened before it got to this. We just want to put it right to this issue. Ask me how I know about that. And then the judge won't allow you to bring in what led up to it, and it looks like something just happened right there, and that's wrong. So that's why we got to always know the totality of the circumstances. So if I knew the totality of the circumstances and it's fine, sure, I'm good with him being fired. Based on the information I have right now, it's so hard to say because stuff is so political. People are so emotional. And some people make their decisions based on what they think the headlines are going to be tomorrow. And that's not real leadership. Real leadership needs to be based on the truth.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and land this bird because certainly we did a good job in trying to go ahead and pick out the certain points of this where I feel as though that can be tension driven. But many of you, I think we looked at about 70%, 73% are not subscribed to the channel. Help us out. Go ahead and subscribe, hit the notification, like button. But more importantly, we'd like to go ahead and hear what you think about this case and comment on what you would have done. In particular, if you were definitely like Kenneth in the house and somebody just busts open your door, what are you going to do? And I think that that's part of the community that we're trying to have is to see what or do you agree with what my brother has to say about certainly what his points are, my points are, and so on and so forth. So this is the type of engaging comments that we like to go ahead and some of you are bringing it. I respond to those every day, actually. So I appreciate that. Brother, you brought it again on this episode. I appreciate you. And we're going to
Thank
go
you,
ahead
brother.
and do this again. They said great things about you on the comments. Just wanted to let you know about that.
Oh, that's good to know. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
I was joking.
Now, whatever.
All right, brother.
All right, brother. You take care.
Talk to you later. All right.
Okay, bye.